Hey, I'm Brennan, and this is going to be the first of hopefully many videos related to transgender issues. I run a blog called Gender Den. I'm probably going to put it in the description. Um, I've always wanted to do that. I've also always wanted to make these videos. I've always been really inspired by all the really open and wonderful transgender people on YouTube, and hopefully I can join the ranks. It'd be pretty sweet. Okay, so I have some questions that I had friends ask me because I want to educate people, and a lot of people are nervous about asking transgender people questions because we can be kind of grumpy with that. But I just wanted to make kind of a safe and open space where I could answer questions that aren't too weird. Okay, so the first question or crop of questions I have come from Leah, who is a former college professor of mine and a mentor, just an all-around wonderful person. So her first question is, I feel strongly that it is not a transgender person's responsibility to educate the public. So I wonder how best to educate myself as an ally and a person who strives to support all young people. I think this is a really great question. The phrase, "I'm not here to educate you," definitely gets thrown around a lot. But I'm realistic. I understand that people are curious, people don't understand, and answering questions and sharing what I'm dealing with, it definitely helps other people understand. So I do tend to be more open to questions, and that's me. I mean, everybody's different. So I say just keep asking questions. I mean, curiosity in and of itself is not offensive, but respect boundaries. When a trans person says, I'm not comfortable talking about this, ask something else. Like, go Google it. Like, it's all about boundaries. And for people who get like, adult trans people who get overly defensive about simple questions, I do think it's a little over the top, but that again is me. I've definitely been subjected to lines of questioning that were just like, holy shit, get me out of here. Like, stop asking me this. Why are you asking me this? Like, so I do understand that. And the next question is, what is the one thing you wish allies would, what's one thing you would realize allies, oh my god, what's one thing you wish allies would realize that they typically don't? Okay, I think a really big one is that transgender people have lives and selves outside of being transgender. Just like any woman has a life and a self outside and things that she thinks about and does that are not related to her being a woman, and a man has things that he does and likes and yada 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 and is interested in that doesn't necessarily relate to him being a man. Transgender isn't the only thing on my radar. It isn't the only thing I think about. It isn't, it doesn't possess my mind. I think the fact that a lot of my friends really only, I don't live near a lot of my friends, and so y'all see me on Facebook, and I do a lot of advocating there, and that is a space that I choose to do that in. So I guess if you were to hang out with me in real life, you'd see that I don't actually talk about being trans that much. So, I mean, when it comes up, it comes up, but, I have other interests. I like birds, I like punk rock, I like shitty crime television, I like hanging out with my friends. I like watching Netflix. Like, there's lots of stuff that I do that aren't related to being trans, and I think that's important to keep in mind. Also, like, that also feeds into, like, I've had people introduce me to somebody else, be like, oh, this is my trans friend, you guys are both trans, now get along. It's like, what? Like, A, you just outed me, and I didn't give you permission to do that, that's fucked up, and B, like, just because I'm trans doesn't mean I'm going to like and relate to every single other trans person on the planet. Like, just because somebody's a woman or black or, like, a man or, like, plays football doesn't mean they're going to like every single other person that, like, is those things or does those things. Like, that's a ridiculous thing to think. It's a big part of my identity only because it's something that I have to, like, constantly assert. It's the only reason why it's a big deal for me. If the world were different, I was going to say if I were born to the right body, but I don't really have a problem with my, like, being female bodied that much. Like, primary sex characteristics I don't really have that much of a problem with. I don't know, it's just, like, it's not like that not that big of a thing, I guess. I don't know. It's weird. I think another thing that I wish allies would realize is, like, allies, just, like, ally as an identity is really problematic. Like, you need to listen to us. If transgender person is telling you that something is hurtful and bothersome, like, they're right. You're, like, don't try and assert that it's not, or assert your point, or, you know, use that they're expressing that they're uncomfortable and putting forth a boundary as a springboard to talk about what you want to talk about. Just listen to them. That's being an ally. If you're just using, like, something someone trans is saying, like, you know, this upsets me, like, as a springboard to have a debate about, like, something philosophical about, like, what's upsetting, like, just stop. Like, it's not, like, it's not being an ally. That's exploitative, and that's, like, expecting too much out of somebody, and that's not listening to someone who's dealing with shit that you don't deal with. Like, that's not being an ally at all. That's just, you know, with being an ally, you gotta put your money where your mouth is with that, in my opinion. The next question from Leah is that I mentioned I might have to detransition for a new job. Was that the case, and what was that like for you, and what made you make the decision? This is in reference to a restaurant job I had kind of over the Christmas season, where they hired me and then fired me and only paid me under the table, but never told me I was temp. So yeah, they're getting a little call from the IRS, but yeah, just that wasn't necessarily, like, I didn't have to detransition. They weren't like, you have to dress like a girl. I mean, I've worked at jobs where they have sent me home and told me to change my shirt because it wasn't a female shirt. Like, I should have sued them. I would be very rich and happy right now if I had done that. But, you know, this job was more just like, I'm very out at my other job, which is in the Village. It's a very queer-friendly, queer place to work. It's in a queer part of the city, so, you know, I'm very out at that job, so it was weird to have to come to this new job where I'm wearing a girl's uniform and I have to ask explicitly, can I get a men's shirt? You know, I have to straight up tell my coworkers, hey, like, because my other job, they were there with the social transition, you know, they were there when I started saying, like, hey, this is how I want to be referred to. Like, they were there for kind of, like, my name shift, and, you know, this other job just didn't know that, so I just had to, you know, people are interacting with me, like, oh, hey, girl, like, da-da-da-da, kind of interacting with me as, like, a, you know, a cis girl, and it's like, that's wrong. Like, you're not interacting with me in a way that makes any sense to me. It makes me really uncomfortable, so I just kind of had to set people straight, like, hey, you know, I'm a trans man, I'm going to be going on, you know, I'm going to be embarking on the physical side of my journey this coming year. Like, but, you know, as far as, like, professional jobs go, I don't apply to jobs that I think that I would have a problem with as far as gender goes. I think that in the kind of work I'm doing, being trans does give me an edge in LGBT advocacy and education. So, yeah, I don't really worry too much about that. And if someone doesn't want to hire me because I'm trans, like, hopefully that's going to be illegal soon. So you're going to have to think of another way around that. The next question from Leah is, she says she has in mind that New York City would be, at the very least, a tolerant environment. But in what ways is New York City a supportive place to live for trans people, and in what ways does progress still need to be made? This is an excellent question. You know, New York City is very liberal. There's a lot of different people. You know, I work in the Village, which is historically a gay neighborhood. You know, that's where Stonewall was. And, you know, New York City was where the gay rights movement started. It's where the initial Stonewall riots were at. It's where, you know, the drag scene first started, like, all the weird gay stuff, like the Warhol Factory and everything like that. That all came out of New York City. So there's definitely a huge history of gay culture here, and I think that's very interesting and very unique for a city. The only other city like that really is San Francisco, obviously. There aren't a lot of cities with a very discernible, not just gay culture, like contemporary gay culture and nightlife and stuff, but a history, like, where you can go to Gay Street and you can go and see where it started, and that's really cool. That's really awesome. And because of that, there's still a lot of really great trans-friendly incentives for people, like for trans people in New York City. There's Cal and Lord. There's a lot of, you know, street, oh my god, what do you call them? I should know this. Street initiatives. Like, you go and you talk to homeless youth and homeless trans kids, and there's a lot of, you know, programs that feed them and, you know, put on balls for them and, you know, get health care and, you know, trans-affirming mental health care, which is really hard to find. There's just a lot of really good queer incentives in New York City, so that's really important. People shouldn't have to leave their communities to get good care. And as far as progress that still needs to be made, you know, people think New York is like this super liberal place. I mean, it's an international city. There's people from everywhere. There's conservatives here too. Some of the richest people in the world live in New York City, and they're not liberals. Like, they're conservatives. There's a lot of yuppies, and they're conservatives. There's a lot of people, you know, my therapy is in Times Square, so I get a lot of weird looks when I leave Brooklyn, when I leave downtown, you know, where people aren't used to seeing kind of gender bendy, like, can't really tell. Like, I get stared at a lot, and you know, that's a little annoying. And then also you have a lot of, you know, there's a lot of Black and Latino communities here that are more conservative, especially on the Latino side. Like, you know, they're more religious, they're more conservative. Latin American countries have statistically a higher rate of anti-trans violence and murders. So there's just a lot of cultural misunderstanding there, just like there would be anywhere else. I don't think it's impossible to make progress in those areas. You know, I do education that hits at these communities, and, you know, and there's people, you know, working to advocate in, like, legal spheres to stop discrimination. I mean, it's happening, like, and it's going to progress, and any sort of leftover resentment is going to be because of attitude and not because of laws, like, you know, and that's just going to take slower, and it might not happen in my lifetime, but we'll see. The next question is, how has transitioning affected your emerging adulthood? It seems to me that one's 20s are difficult enough to navigate without the added complication brought on by transitioning. And is this the case for you? I think this is a really, really, really great question. And you know, these questions are the kind of stuff that when you see, like, Laverne Cox and Carmen Carrera, like, up on, you know, Katie Couric show getting quizzed about their genitals. These are the kind of questions I wish people ask them, because, you know, as a young trans person, these are the kind of things I want to see someone answer. And as someone who wants to learn from anybody's experience, these are the kind of things I want to see them talk about. But yeah, transitioning in my 20s has been really interesting. I wish I'd done it sooner. That's a regret I hear from a lot of people who transition sort of after puberty, after their first puberty. I feel like I'm going to miss out on being a guy in my 20s. That, you know, that's really sad for me. You know, whatever, you know, 30 is the new 20, right? So it's probably not that big of a deal. But it's actually, you know, it's actually been really good for me. Like, I think a lot of it is because I didn't really know who I was when I was identifying as a woman. There was so much of, like, who am I, and, like, agonizing over, like, who I am and what I'm supposed to be and, like, who I'm going to become. And I never knew what I would be like as a woman. I've never really understood myself that way. So kind of just coming out and being like, you know, I understand myself as a man. I understand that I'm an emotional, expressive man, and that, you know, I'm not a masculine woman. I'm a feminine man. Like, there's a huge difference there. And that's, you know, that's something that maybe other people don't feel or don't really see that as being different things, and they don't experience that disconnect. But, you know, I want my masculinity to be the inherency and my femininity to be the novelty, not the other way around. And I think that's a very important distinction, even if it's one that's not on your radar. So yeah, like, coming into myself and having this happen now, like, in my late 20s, I think it's timed really well, and it's also coinciding with me reaching sobriety. Like, I'm in recovery for alcohol. I'm in AA, like, and I'm doing this step work and, like, really coming into myself in a spiritual way at the same time that I've been questioning and figuring out this gender stuff, which has also made me more spiritual. You know, I'm just reaching this point where I'm very calm and mellow, and just I feel more together, and I think that's a combination of, you know, expressing who I am more honestly, and also just, like, being sober. Like, there's a lot, I'm discovering so much correlation there between, you know, like, how much of yourself you compartmentalize and hide and try to kill, and when you're an alcoholic, and the same thing when you're trans. Like, it's really interesting, the collision there. Okay, so that's all I have from Leah. So it's really awesome. And my next question is from Milo, who asks if I will marry him. And that's a no, because marriage is an oppressive institution. The next question is also from Milo, who says that, am I worried about transitioning in Texas? He knows that I have trans slurs thrown at you at work, and I live in New York City now. And do I worry about that happening in Texas? So it's not so much that slurs get thrown at me at work, it's that, people think it's, like, appropriate to speculate about someone's gender in front of me and to me. Like, we get like I said, I work in the Village, there's a lot of, like, trans customers that'll come in, and people, like, ask me, like, is she trans? I'm like, I don't, like, why would I want to answer that question? Like, why are you asking me this? Like, what? So that's more what I run into, which I feel like I'm going to run into everywhere. But yeah, for those of you who don't know, I am moving to Austin with my boyfriend of 2.5 years in July, so I'm really excited about that. It's going to be great for my relationship. It's going to be great for me. I'm a restless person. I need to move around, so that's really cool. And I'm really, really pumped and excited. And I'm gonna be going with a support system. My partner is not trans, but he is amazing, and he's really understanding and accepting of me. And I feel safe, and I'm going with someone that makes me feel safe. So that's really important. And I think that's lessening any fears that I might have. Also, I've been a queer in the South before. Before I was socially transitioning, I was living in Maryland, but I was still questioning, and I was visibly weird. Like, I was visibly, like, dykey and, like, masculine, and it's I don't know. Like, I always find it strange when like, my family's from the South, and when, like, Yankees talk about how, closed-minded the South is, like, it's not as bad as people say. Like, like I said before about New York, there's liberals and conservatives everywhere. Like, Austin's not like the rest of Texas. Like, that's everything I've heard, is that it's weird, it's queer, like, everybody's, like, from somewhere else, like, it's really young, it's hip, it's, like, it's a college town. Like, it's very different from the rest of Texas, and I think that it's not going to be as big of a deal as people who I think tend to demonize the South think it's going to be, because a lot of the people saying this kind of stuff are people who haven't spent a lot of time in the South and don't know really all that much about it. So I don't know. I just know plenty of, like, wonderful, accepting people that have surprised me, that, you just total bros and, like, hicks that I like, hicks and bros that I thought that could never understand me, that have actually ended up being very, like, thoughtful and accepting people. And I know tons of people who are all, like, radical, like, punks, da-da-da-da, who have been total bigots. Like, there's no way of knowing. Like, there's no way. And I'm not going to judge a place till I go there. If it ends up being dangerous and somewhere I don't want to be, I'll move. Like, I'm lucky enough to have that option. Also, I'm not a trans woman, and I'm not a woman. So, like, the world is, like, safer for me, especially as I'm entering a more masculine space. Like, the way that I dress, the way I present myself, like, is pretty masculine. Like, I'm not. I don't think I have oh my God, I'm, like, not expressing myself. I'm not gonna be as much in danger as I would be if I were a trans woman. That's just a fact. Like, it's not something, like, endangerment isn't on my mind as much as it would be for someone with a trans feminine experience. That's absolute, and that goes pretty much all across the board for trans men versus trans women. The fear, the anxiety isn't as high in trans men. But also, just for my career in LGBT advocacy and stuff, I really want to work in a place that's more of a challenge. I know what it's like to be, a fledgling queer in a place that doesn't foster that. I'm from small town Massachusetts. I went to Catholic school my whole life. My parents are really conservative and very religious. I never heard about, LGBT people unless it was in the concept of sin, of wrong, of hell, of deviant, of those people. I never really knew that there was, like, a possibility to be happy and to be healthy as one of those people. And that's what I'm trying to do by making this video and running my blog, is to show that you can be happy and trans, and you can have a good life and be trans, and those two things, like, don't have to contradict each other. And I want to pay it forward. Like, I want to work in communities where people might not have access to, like I said, New York has all these great health and education incentives. I want to work somewhere where that isn't the case, where people, like, really need, like, that support and aren't getting it. Like, a queer kid in Texas needs trans-affirming care, mental, physical, emotional, community support way more than a kid in New York needs it, like, absolutely. And those are the lost places, like the queers in the country and like the rural areas, like those are the kids who need it. Those are the kids who need the help and the support. Like, you know, not New York, not kids in New York. There's enough here. Like, it's good, but it should be everywhere. Like, every city should have what New York has, and that's what I want to do, and I'm up to the challenge. So my next question comes from Jessie, who is asking me to answer with something about how I feel about existing in a space of male privilege, i.e. the world, and do I ever think about how passing as a cisgender male might erase visible queerness, which are basically their anxieties about transition. Okay, so I have been existing in more of a male space, and it's been really interesting. It's been a huge learning experience. I've learned a lot about women, and I've learned a lot about men in the past couple of years. In essentially men and women. You know, I've kind of learned more about expectations. You know, and I'm on the train, I get you know, if I'm looking more masculine, I get a lot more dirty looks for not giving up my seat for somebody. I think that's kind of interesting, just that, like, chivalry expectation that's still around. I think, you know, I don't get street harassed anymore. That's a big thing. No one talks to me. No one talks to me on the train. No one talks to me in public. No one fucking talks to me. Like, you know, they not like it was. It's like, oh hey, like, da, 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 what are you reading? Like, da, da, da. Like, when you're a woman and people just think that you're there to be talked to. Like, it's a total 180. It's crazy. Like, and I've lost touch with that. I've lost touch with what it's like to leave my house and the consequences of looking female in the world. I've lost touch with that, and it's a shame. Like, it's made me lose a degree of empathy with women. You know, I read articles and hear things my friends complain about, and I'm like, it's not that big of a deal. But it's because I'm out of touch with it. Like, it's because you know, 2 years ago, that would have made my blood boil, and I would have got all up in arms and been like, no, that's, you know, I experienced this matters, like, da-da-da-da, and now I just am more, like, likely to shrug things off. So that's something I do need to keep in check, like, shrugging off things just because they don't affect me. And I don't want to be a sexist guy. I don't want to be a guy who denies male privilege. So that's something I need to keep in mind. You know, another thing with the whole idea of male privilege, I don't believe privilege is black and white. You know, one thing I've definitely had to, you know, I need to learn how to advocate for women as a man. Like, that's different. Like, that's really different. You know, before, like, if I heard some guys, like, being a dick to a woman on the street, being like, hey, baby, like, meh. Like, I would turn around and be like, what are you doing? Like, what are you doing right now? And, like, I had agency to be able to do that, because, like, they're not going to punch me. Like, but, you know, if I'm occupying a male space and I call a guy out for that, I could get killed. I could get beat up. Like, I'm a small guy. Like, you know, Jameson Green in his book, Becoming a Visible Man, talks about how someone who's transmasculine does not gain full male privilege because, one, he might be of shorter stature and just, you know, physically smaller, and B, and, like, that's a big deal in man world, and B, like, he's still trans. Like, there's still always the chance of someone finding that out and killing him or hurting him, or that being a consequence that a cis man isn't going to ever have to deal with. So yeah, I definitely have a lot of thoughts about occupying a male space, and like I said, it's been a huge learning experience. And as far as that erasing visible queerness, I actually don't worry at all about that, because I'm attracted to men predominantly, so I'm a gay guy, so I'm like still going to be in queer spaces. It's actually been the opposite. You know, I grew up, you know, a lot of the people I hear express the kind of concerns that you're expressing, Jesse, about, you know, erasing queer visibility, are people who kind of started off as, like, queer women and are now, like, if they were to transition, would be, you know, read as straight men by larger society. That's more when I hear people expressing that anxiety. You know, I've had the privilege of my whole life, my sexuality being normalized as a straight woman, a straight girl, like, so many quotes all over the place. You know, I had my sexuality normalized, and I never was in queer spaces. There weren't my spaces. I like, understood the butchness of a lesbian, but I'm not into women. Like, rarely. Like, so that's That's definitely interesting, that there's a huge opposite experience there. You know, for somebody who's following the traditional trans trajectory of like tomboy child to lesbian to butch lesbian to trans man, they are experiencing an erasure and an expulsion from queer spaces, from lesbian spaces, which I think can be traumatic. I think that can be very like, because you know, now you're all of a sudden you're a straight man, but it's like I'm not a straight. Like it's definitely more complicated, I think, to go from a queer space to a straight phase, this queer phase to a straight phase via gender transition. I think that's got to be really hard, and it's not something that I think I'll ever have to deal with. The next question comes from Cassie, who is another good friend of mine from college, who is now a math teacher on the college level. And she asks, well, she says that she found a really cool article about how to make a classroom trans-friendly, and to touch on that. So I mean, if you're teaching on the university level in a specialized, I mean, you teach university math, and it's like kind of a specialized field, I think there's not a lot of room for addressing trans issues. I think a good way is to, when you do the initial icebreaker, like write your name and some interests on a card, saying you include gender pronouns. I think that is a good way for people to kind of be introduced to the idea of like, wait, like somebody might visibly look this way but feel this way and prefer to be, you know, referred to in this way. I think that's a really, you know, easy way to establish that. Whenever I'm teaching workshops, even if it's just like how to use a condom, like I'll open up with like, hey, everybody say their name and preferred gender pronoun, like, because I just think it's a good exercise to get people in the habit of doing. If you're teaching something like history, you should do special topics about people who are transgender, like transgender people in history. Like, I think that's a really great way to do it. Also, zero tolerance policy for bullying. If you hear someone say like fag or tranny or like something like that, person needs to leave the room. Like, that person needs to like be in like training of like why that's wrong. And it's not training of like that's not a word you use at somebody, like that's a bad word. It has to be like, what is that word? How has that word been historically used? Who has been killed and heard that word while they're being killed? Like, and, you know, when I hear arguments about people defending, like, oh, you know, black people say, like, you know, call each other nigger, why can't I say nigger? It's like, do you understand that, like, today, black people are, like, beaten to death, and that's the word that they're hearing, like, while that's happening? Do you understand that people still today hear the word tranny while their fucking head's being cut off? Like, do you, like, anyway, I'm going on a tangent there, but yeah, there's definitely, I think zero tolerance is absolutely necessary, and, visceral graphic lessons as to why that zero tolerance exists. That's just a few ideas that I have. Okay, and the last question comes from Charlie, who's an old coworker of mine back from my fine dining days. He's asking if I've followed the Grantland/Dr. V situation. He says he hesitated to ask me for my thoughts, because he doesn't want to be that guy who asks the trans friend how he feels about every trans article, but, you know, that's what I'm asking right now. So, yeah, he finally asked this question. Okay, I'm sorry, I'm, like, reading. Okay, so the Grantland Dr. V situation, I actually had to Google because I tend to avoid a lot of news, especially those related to trans people, because it's really scary and upsetting for me. And, you know, when I'm already dealing with a lot in a day, you know, I'm going to therapy and having the receptionist, like, use my first name. And I'm like, there's a note on my file that says, like, what are you doing? Like, I don't come here to get this. Like, it's just, so when I'm dealing with stuff like that, there's little micro things. Like, the last thing I want to do is come home and read an article about, like, you know, someone getting it carved into their forehead in a locker room. Like, so it just, I had to Google this, and basically the situation was that a sports writer was investigating the inventor of some, like, magic putters, like golf putters, named Dr. V, and apparently in their investigation they found out that this Dr. V had gender reassignment or had undergone gender transition, and they outed this person to one of their investors, and Dr. V ended up killing themselves. So my opinion on that is, like, you don't out a trans person, like, especially if it's not really related to your investigation. If you're investigating the inventor of golf clubs or, like, magic putter clubs or whatever the hell, like, I'm sorry, I'm not really into golf or anything, but, like, like, what relevance does someone's transgender status have, or transgender identity, or lived transgender experience have on their invention of this thing? Like, why is that even, like, necessary to put in your article? Like, why? It's inexcusable. Like, there's no reason to do that. Like, it's not, someone's transgender status isn't like a little bit of scandal or like something that you can just like throw in there to make waves and like, you know, titillate. Like, we're real people. Like, we're people, and outing someone like that can be extremely traumatic and can ruin someone's career. Like, it is still legal to fire someone for being trans. Like, it is, like, you can't out people. Like, you can't do that. Like, that's, it's just not okay. Like, there's no excuse for it. And I'm getting like really fired up about this because I've been outed before, and you know, and I've stopped talking to that person. You know, I mentioned before, they introduced me like, oh, you're a trans, this person trans. It's like, I did not give you permission to introduce me like that. And like, you don't know who's in this room. You don't know who's in this bar. You don't know who can follow me home and kill me. Like, go watch Boys Don't Cry and tell me that it's okay to out somebody. Like, it's common sense. And I guess there's a follow-up here. Apparently the author of the article, his most interesting point was that he apologized that he never asked somebody who is from the trans community to read the article and point out that this was wrong to do. And is this in some way a sign of hope that an influential editor from the sports world, one of the world's greatest bastions of gender normativity, is recognizing the lack of representation within his own organization? I think it is a small sign of hope in an otherwise stupid and inexcusable and terrible thing to do. I don't understand what would possess somebody to bring up something like that has nothing to do with the article at hand. I don't know. I guess I'm not really well informed on this topic to answer it. But I mean, if there is a small shred of hope in that, yeah, I mean, cool. He acknowledged in his apology that he should have asked a transgender person. But dude, that ship sailed. Too little, too late. That person is dead, and you killed them. That's what happened. Like, I don't know. Sorry to end this like Q&A on such an awful note. Awful. But yeah, that's all the questions I have today. So hopefully I'll get more questions and answer more. And sorry this is like a half hour long, but hopefully I'm fascinating. So love y'all and have a good night.